Welcome to the VCast, a Vendux podcast titled The Next Stage CEO. Today I'm joined by Yoni Rubin, CEO and co-founder of MRGN, based in New York. MRGN is the AI brain for restaurants. It reads the data pouring out of systems like Toast and Square and QuickBooks, blends in outside signals like traffic and weather and local competition, and tells operators exactly what to do. The promise is simple: give restaurateurs their mental health back with actionable insights that lifts the bottom line. Joni, welcome to the VCast.
Thanks for having me, Hen.
Wonderful. So MRGN started as a cloud financial modeling platform, if I understand it correctly. What did you originally set out to build?
Yeah, so I was building financial models in Excel for years and far too often. And they were just riddled with human error, and ultimately we didn't make a lot of good use out of them.
Hmm.
So one day I woke up and decided to take my leap into entrepreneurship and start a business that would basically build a platform in the cloud to build budget models or operating plans for startups.
Hmm.
So the idea would be that you would just connect your accounting system, let's say QuickBooks, and within 30 seconds you would have a working financial model, which otherwise would take you a couple of weeks to build, and it would probably be error prone. So that's how we started.
Yeah. And my understanding is the business is 6 years old, but the pivot is relatively new.
I would say about halfway through.
Okay.
We made two pretty substantial discoveries along the way. The first one was that selling $100 or $200 a month product to startups in the U.S., of which there are only 84,000, was not going to make for much of a market,
Hmm.
and that small business was a much bigger market at 33 million of them. So we were starting off with restaurants as our kind of our entree into small business. And secondly, the scientific breakthrough more so was the more important one, which was we had users who really appreciated the value that the platform was bringing them. But they said, what if the operating plan or budget could auto adapt to real world dynamics? Different fluctuations, be it micro, macro, economic, weather, traffic, as you mentioned, health and safety like pandemics, municipal decisions, all sorts of different things. So everything happening outside of the four walls of their business would be taken into account in their projections.
Hmm. So already talked about all the data that's coming together. In its core, what problem are you solving for a restaurant? Wouldn't you say that, a restaurateur has all that information, maybe even has the experience to know how to respond to certain outside influences?
Yeah, you would think, and that's what we thought at first. So when we were validating the small business market, we were talking to tech firms, consulting firms, retail, and restaurants. And
Hmm.
restaurants were clearly yelling the loudest. It worked out nicely also because the restaurant space is about a seventh the size of retail. So to start off with a smaller market as kind of a pilot market and test out our theory and our hypothesis was a perfect place to do it. What happened was we would walk into these restaurants and unanimously they would hang on to us for 30 to 45 minutes, chewing our ears off about four or five main problems that they had. So, whereas we thought as kind of salespeople walking into a restaurant, we'd be kicked out immediately, they actually wanted to talk, to chat. So they said, first and foremost, they have far too much data coming out of far too many software systems in the restaurant. Restaurants use approximately 23 different systems, all
Hmm.
across POS, inventory management, payment gateways, data and analytics, everything you can imagine. And what they do is all these systems, they spit out ultimately very robust CSVs, whether on the front end, whether on the site, or in downloadable form.
Hmm.
And the restaurateurs themselves don't know what to make of all of this data. So now let's just hypothetically say they wanted to use a traditional business intelligence platform to make sense of everything. What that would mean would be that they would use a system like, let's say, Margin Edge or 5 Out, and that those systems plug into all of their systems in the restaurant and give them graphs and charts. And that's where we made our next breakthrough, which was everybody said, why do I need an analyst or an MBA to understand what's happening on this dashboard? AI is here. Why can't AI make sense of everything and tell us what to do next? So that's what we ended up building, and that's how we landed on the problem solving aspect. So just so you know, the major problems were everything around expense management. So you can imagine restaurateurs think about costs in terms of the dish rather than the ingredients that go into that dish. So they're not thinking in terms of unit economics. So when a particular ingredient goes up in price suddenly, they don't often understand why their cost just went up in terms of on the dish level. So that's number one. Number two was everything to do with labor. So minimum wage, attrition, scheduling. Scheduling takes them 3 hours a week at a traditional sit-down restaurant, when in theory it could be automated in 2 seconds in a SaaS environment. Inventory management and supply and distribution. So a lot of times we find restaurants that are taking inventory just by looking at their stock rooms, and then oftentimes even faxing orders to their distributors. So there are platforms now that are digitizing that process, but they're not submitting the orders on their behalf based on supply and demand. That's where margin comes in. Margin sits on top of all these systems and tells them exactly what to order and when.
You also blend in a lot of outside data, like traffic, weather, health data, economics, competition. What's the restaurant down the street doing? Is there a Nix parade that's limiting access to your restaurant? Stuff like that.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit of where that data is coming from and how hard is it to integrate that with the internal data that you're taking out of their systems?
So the source is no secret. It's basically any publicly available information at the moment. And over time, we're going to be becoming more and more sophisticated around our data sources. So we may build APIs into specific data sources. But for now, think of it as an analyst is building or looking at your operating model, but also reading the newspaper every day and figuring out how is this news going to impact my business. And so that's where the secret sauce comes in terms of margin. We have a dedicated data science team that's responsible for figuring out exactly how various events will impact a business, in this case, a restaurant. So I'll give you a couple of really, really simplistic examples. So we happen to be validating this idea and talking to the restaurateurs very, very heavily just before the last US elections. And now, what if, around that time, economics in general are a very big topic discussion when we're going into elections. So what if we had a president get elected that was going to levy tariffs on other countries, affecting the supply chains of ingredients that are coming into my restaurant? And suddenly I have to change prices of various dishes on my menu, reprint those menus, and so on. And I have to make sure that they're within a certain price elasticity and consumer sentiment, and so on. So what the platform does is it finds out that these tariffs were levied and then identifies which tariffs affect which ingredients on your menu, which dishes are impacted by those ingredients, what are their prices, and makes certain suggestions based on the various dynamics out there on the supply chain. That's one simplistic kind of use case. A slightly more complicated one might be, how should you staff up your restaurant knowing that there's a concert coming out of the stadium across the street on Sunday night, and at the same time, there's a rainstorm. So normally, if there was no rainstorm, you might have 27,000 people walking by your restaurant. With that, they're going in different directions as well. They're not necessarily going only by your restaurant, but there are multiple exits from that stadium. So our platform takes into account where the location is relative to the exit of the stadium. Is there a rainstorm coming that's going to put a damper on that traffic, and so on, and ultimately tells you how to staff that shift.
Wow. You already mentioned one job function you have in your team, data analysts. I think you're a team of 10 right now. Is that correct?
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah. So what other functions did you initially prioritize in the business?
So I'll tell you one big mistake that I made. Big lesson learned. Earlier on, I was of the opinion that we had to make for a loud launch. So when we were ready, we had to tell the whole world in one big grand opening type of announcement. And someone said to me, I think it was a board member of mine once said to me, why do you have to be so loud and public about it? And I said, because we have to get to the masses. I said, no, you don't have to get to the masses at first. At first, you have to get to enough revenue in order to raise your next round of capital. And so that's a reverse engineering of your financial model and the certain, let's call them criteria of fundraising these days at our stage. And so early on, we had a chief marketing officer and a small team below them. We had customer experience, we had finance, covered in terms of functions within the business. And eventually we came to the realization that we really did not need most of this stuff. And this was before the AI boom. This was before a lot of this was done very easily using LLMs. And so we needed humans to do them, but what we didn't recognize was that we didn't need to do those tasks yet. And so we refactored a bit internally. We cut down the size of the team. We got much more nimble and started moving much faster.
Okay. How are you reaching those restaurateurs today, those that you want to target, since you're not going out loudly with mass marketing and mass, into the masses? Do you have a team on the ground? Is that like a door-to-door type sale?
No, not yet. So the economics of who to go after first are basically based on reverse engineering the amount of capital that is needed to, or revenue that's needed in order to close a pre-seed round. Let's just say $15,000 to $20,000 a month is where the investor kind of atmosphere is right now, and let's just say that translates into 100 paying restaurant locations for us. So when we look around at our close networks, we're lucky enough to have a good deal more than 100 restaurant locations. So we don't have to spend money on Google ads and on ads in generative AI and on LinkedIn and on foot soldiers and so on. I myself, as the founder, I better be on the streets knocking on doors. So it's not that we have necessarily a dedicated team that's doing that, but I and my team are definitely on the, boots on the ground, speaking to restaurateurs regularly, generally asking them for feedback and genuinely asking them for feedback. And then they end up liking the experience and saying, hey, we want to hop on board. So that's kind of the first tranche of customers before we start opening up the floodgates. And that's where we're leveraging our board of directors, where we've got the former president of IHOP and Safeway, a board member from Raising Cane's, hopefully having a board member from Wendy's in the coming months, all of which are opening doors to us at very large franchisee businesses, large restaurant groups, private equity-backed restaurant groups, and so on.
Okay. As you reverse engineered the clientele and the monthly revenue that you need to have in order to be able to raise the next round, did you focus on a particular type of restaurant or a particular geographic location?
Yep.
Or was it just all the ones that you and your co-founders knew and had relationships with?
So there's a focus now, and that's a really good question because the world has moved very heavily from horizontal marketing, horizontal SaaS to vertical SaaS. And so we can't any longer build a product for the masses. It's very hard to get everybody's attention these days with the inundation of social media and advertising. So we are very specific around restaurant groups with up to 60 locations, QSR, quick service restaurants. And they must be in the US with under 25 in headcount per location and under 3 million in revenue per location. So we got very, very specific around who we wanted to tackle first.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's always the way to go at the beginning. Very clearly define your ICP. As a founder, you already mentioned all the things that you're involved in. What's the thing that you would love to get off your plate as a next step?
Anything to do with go-to-market. So there's a bit of an overlap there between product and sales and marketing. And I would love to be in a place of relying on a wonderful team at a scalable place, because we're not quite there yet, where we could bring on CRO, CMO, chief product officers to really zoom in and focus very heavily on their areas of expertise, whereas right now I'm wearing several different hats. Now it's necessary at the beginning stages. That was another mistake, was we brought on a sales team initially. And what we realized was no one was going to sell this product better than the founder. And that's only because the founder has the passion, the know-how. They've had their nails really, really deep in the designs of the platform. And so demonstrating the platform is relatively easy for them. And so the moment I started doing that was the moment we started seeing some success.
As you think about the next couple of months, where are the bottlenecks today that you have in the business? What's
engineering is generally it. Yeah, really good question, because we're at this weird transition phase right now where we started the business pre-LLM craze, which means that we built the foundation of our software without LLMs. So we're not building an LLM wrapper, we're building a substantial proprietary platform technology here. And so that's reliant on human beings, particularly on the product and engineering side of things. So that's our
Yeah.
current bottleneck.
Okay. Where do you want margin to be in 2 or 3 years?
My dream is to have already conquered the restaurant and the retail space and positioned ourselves for an acquisition by the likes of Power BI and Microsoft, MicroStrategy, and some other of the big BI players out there. I
Mm.
believe that, I think we're all seeing the death of SaaS to some extent. And with that is also, I think, going to come the death of business intelligence as we know it today. We don't need graphs and charts, dashboards. We don't need the type of data that we're getting out of those dashboards is relatively useless. And so to get actionable insights that are contextualized to what's happening in the real world, I think is the very next generation, if not several generations of business intelligence. And I think that Microsoft and others will have, and SciSense will have a keen eye towards companies like ours. So I
Mm.
would love to see us there within about two to 3 years.
Okay. You already mentioned, a mistake that you made, thinking that you were having to go after mass market. Um, is there something else that, when you look back, you would have done and should have done differently in order to have the business grow faster?
Yeah, the first, easy. The primary thing, the primary lesson learned was focus on customer requirements.
Mm.
So earlier on, as a first-time founder, I was very nervous about talking to customers or prospective customers
Yeah.
because I was nervous about them telling me that I did something wrong, and then I'd have to go back to the drawing board and fix it, and so on. And so I didn't speak to customers for a while. I was kind of building just off the cuff based on what I wanted to be built, and that was a mistake. So if I were to start a business tomorrow, I would put the product front and center. Whereas 6, 7, 8 years ago, before the product was fully baked, you were more worried about a working pitch deck to pitch investors. So product front and center, and in order to get it there, have to speak to prospective customers, validate the idea, the wireframes, the the hi-fi designs, as well as a staging environment before you go live, and then drive towards early revenue. Gone are the days of raising capital based on an idea, a pitch deck, or an MVP. You have to be generating substantial revenue early on in order to really draw attention from institutional investors these days.
Mm. Thank you. I mean, definitely a great advice for other founders who are in a similar position. And I love the story about the pivot, how you're, adjusted what it is that you're actually offering and bringing to the marketplace. Where should listeners go to learn more about you and Margin?
Margin.ai, MRGN.ai. I'm very easily accessible on LinkedIn, Yoni Rubin or Yonatan Rubin, and submit a contact request on the website, and it'll come directly to me.
Wonderful. Yoni, thank you for being a guest on the VCast, the Next Stage CEO.
Thanks for having me, Henning.